The Chinese regime is hinting at war, from an amphibious landing exercise simulating an invasion across the Taiwan Strait, to increasing benefits for military members, to making changes to a law that gives Communist leader Xi Jinping more power to mobilize the country and wage a war. A series of military-related moves by China is raising concerns. Some worry the communist regime is already on track toward preparing the country to invade Taiwan. And it may not stop at Taiwan either. The U.S. report says the regime may quadruple its nuclear weapons stockpile from its current 200 to 700 in 2027 and 1,000 by 2030. We don't know if the regime is seriously trying to mobilize its 1.4 billion people for a military conflict in the near future, or if it's just trying to ramp up nationalism and distract the population from current domestic problems. As for other options, given its threats to Taiwan, Beijing could be trying to launch an information war across the strait. That way, the Taiwanese people will submit without the Communist Party firing a single bullet. Regardless of the regime's actual goal, the atmosphere in mainland China is changing. Unverified videos of the Chinese army allegedly deploying weapons have spread like wildfire through Chinese social media platforms, sparking online discussions about Taiwan. What's more, Chinese citizens started panic buying and stocking up on essentials like rice. That's after China's Ministry of Commerce published a notice advising households to stock up on daily necessities in case of emergencies. The notice prompted heated online debate over whether emergencies indicated a potential invasion of Taiwan. The panic buying got so intense, state media later had to clarify that the advice wasn't related to war plans against Taiwan. And along China's coast, authorities in Jiangsu, Shandong, and Anhui provinces have started handing out air defense emergency kits to residents. They are also posting informational videos about what to do in the event of an air raid. Many citizens posted about the packages they received on social media, while Chinese media outlets reported that compressed biscuits and luncheon meat became the top most searched items on online shopping platforms. Chinese citizens' speculation about war isn't out of the blue. Since the beginning of the year, the regime has taken a series of actions, shifting the country towards what looks like wartime policy. This February, Beijing put a law into effect that for the first time ever explicitly allows its Coast Guard to fire on foreign vessels, meaning vessels that enter waters claimed by the Chinese regime, but that may be disputed by the international community, including the South China Sea. And then in October, another string of actions began. First, the regime conducted one of the largest military exercises ever to simulate a land-based invasion of Taiwan. Then news came that the regime had tested a nuclear-capable hypersonic missile designed to evade American nuclear defenses.
So, bottom line, all this essentially means China is close to being able to launch a nuclear warhead against any other nation without any warning, and there'd be no defense against it.
The U.S. military's top officer, General Mark Milley, called it a very significant test. He noted that China's nuclear missile represents a fundamental change in the military balance of power. Also last month, the regime passed a new land border law. In it, Beijing declared it will combat any act that undermines territorial sovereignty and land boundaries.
Beijing's new land border law is a serious concern.
India's foreign ministry spokesman said China's new law could have implications for conditions in the two countries' shared border areas. The Chinese regime also made some legal changes that essentially give Xi Jinping greater power to mobilize the country for war. The director for a top Chinese think tank wrote that the legal update would help the regime to mobilize its civil and military resources more effectively in order to realize China's reunification. In communist China, the term reunification is linked to a future invasion against Taiwan. That's because Beijing believes the island is part of China and must be reunified with the mainland. That's exactly what many Chinese netizens speculate will happen. Some left comments like, "We have to liberate Taiwan," and "Something huge is coming" on social media platform Weibo. Speaking of Xi Jinping, he's also asking for more groundbreaking weapons to gear up the Chinese military. That's on top of new Army equipment ordering regulations. The new rules ask for a comprehensive focus on preparing for war and fighting battles, and look to ensure the rapid generation of combat power.
坚持以战领建，明确保障战斗力快速生成的具体措施。
He also recently approved granting some benefits for Chinese soldiers, free medical services for their spouses.
经中央军委主席习近平批准，实现军人配偶免费医疗，军官军事父母和配偶父母优惠医疗。
That takes effect next year. Then comes a handful of moves directly targeting Taiwan. Despite the fact that the island's not under the regime's control, Beijing has already started to make plans to allocate Taiwan's public finances. Chinese media reported that at a so-called National Reunification and Chinese Rejuvenation seminar, the Communist regime's Taiwan Affairs Office Deputy Director Liu Junchuan claimed that after reunification, Taiwan's financial income can totally be used to improve civil life, though he didn't mention whose civil life he was referring to. A report published by Georgetown University shows that China's People's Liberation Army, or PLA, has used and is using artificial intelligence to simulate war games, specifically for invasion operations against Taiwan. So what does the U.S. have to say? Despite the tensions, top U.S. military leaders don't seem to believe that war is imminent. U.S. Army General Mark Milley said at last week's Aspen Security Forum that he didn't think the invasion would strike in the near future. But he did add, quote, "The Chinese are clearly and unambiguously building the capability to provide those options to the national leadership if they so choose at some point in the future." He also pointed out that there is no question the U.S. has the ability to defend Taiwan. At the same time, Trump-era National Security Advisor Robert O'Brien warns of Chinese mischief on Taiwan by 2024. He says Beijing probably won't do anything during the Beijing Winter Olympics in February, but noted the regime may have concerns that a tough-on-China candidate could win the White House in 2024, like Donald Trump or Mike Pompeo. Because of that, O'Brien warns the window between those two events could pose a dangerous opportunity for Beijing. Asked in an October town hall about whether he would defend Taiwan against a Chinese attack, President Biden replied,
"Yes, we have a commitment to do that."
But the White House later walked back the comment, saying the U.S. maintains its so-called strategic ambiguity policy. So what exactly is the U.S.'s commitment to Taiwan? To summarize, the U.S. follows something called the One China policy.
As you said, we remain committed to our One China policy.
One China policy.
President Trump agreeing to honor the One China policy.
The One China policy has become an incantation. It's like the Lord's Prayer. You simply can't question it.
But what exactly is the One China policy? It goes back to over 70 years ago.
Mao Zedong is head of the Communist Party. During
the Chinese Civil War in the 1940s, the Communist Army led by Mao Zedong defeated the ruling Nationalist Party led by Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang and his government, known as the Republic of China, retreated to the island of Taiwan. In 1971, the United Nations General Assembly formally declared the communist government to be the only legitimate representatives of China and expelled the representatives of nationalist leader Chiang Kai-shek from their UN seats.
In view of the frenzy and the irrational manners that has been exhibited in this hall, the delegation of the Republic of China has now decided not to take part to any further proceedings of this General Assembly.
Nonetheless, Taiwan started moving towards democracy. After ending decades of martial law in the 1980s, the government in Taiwan saw its first peaceful transition of power to another political party in 2000. The island now enjoys the freedoms of speech, press, and religion. That's in contrast to the one-party dictatorship that controls communist China. To understand the U.S.'s One China policy, it's important to note that it's not the same thing as the so-called One China principle talked about by the Chinese Communist regime. Under that principle, Beijing claims Taiwan as one of its provinces and vows to reunite it with the mainland by force if necessary.
我们必须坚决指出，搞台独是死路一条。
The U.S.'s One China policy is much longer and more complicated than Beijing's version. It's composed of several key documents and statements issued by different administrations throughout the decades, including the 3 U.S.-China joint communiques, the Taiwan Relations Act, and the 6 assurances. After President Richard Nixon visited China, the U.S. built formal diplomatic ties with Communist China in 1979. In the joint communique, the U.S. recognizes the government in Beijing as the sole legal government of China, and it acknowledges the Chinese position that there is but one China and Taiwan is part of China. But acknowledgement does not equal endorsement. By only acknowledging the Chinese position, the United States did not adopt as its own. In essence, the U.S. is not recognizing the PRC's claim over Taiwan, nor Taiwan as a sovereign state. U.S. policy has considered Taiwan's status as unsettled. But that's not all.